All right, so you wanted to take a closer look at Jon Jones' victory at UFC 309, and wow, these articles you sent over are something else.
It's quite the story, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, not only did Jones totally dominate Stipe Miocic, but he did it with President-elect Trump watching.
Yeah, it's definitely not your everyday scene to have a president-elect at a UFC fight.
Right,
Yeah,
especially one with such a close relationship to the organization.
exactly.
So we're going to break down the fight itself, Miocic's retirement. Oh, and that crazy atmosphere at Madison Square Garden.
Oh, yeah, the Garden was electric that night.
Apparently, it was packed with politicians and celebrities. It sounds like it was more than just a fight, like a whole cultural moment.
Yeah, you get the sense that this fight had an extra layer of significance.
Right.
And when you add in names like Elon Musk and Robert Kennedy Jr.,
And House Speaker Mike Johnson was there too. I mean, come on.
right, it definitely adds another dimension to the whole event.
Okay, so first up, let's talk about Jones's performance in the octagon. He was relentless. Was this typical of his fighting style?
Oh, absolutely. Jones has always been known for his aggressive approach, but what I think was so impressive in this fight was how he combined that aggression with a really smart strategy. He was targeting Miocic's head early on, like he was softening him up for the later rounds.
And that spinning back kick to the ribs in the third round, brutal.
Oh, man, that was a thing of beauty.
Was that a signature move for Jones?
Not necessarily a signature move, I'd say, but it really shows off his versatility. He's
Yeah.
not just some brawler. He's a real technician in the octagon with this huge range of striking skills. And that kick, it wasn't just about power, it was about precision. It landed right on Miocic's litter, which is a notoriously vulnerable spot, and you could just see the wind get knocked out of him.
Yeah, and that move set up the TKO victory, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, sometimes I get those terms mixed up.
sure.
Can you remind me what exactly defines a TKO?
Of course. A TKO, or technical knockout, happens when the referee has to stop the fight because they decide that one of the fighters can't safely continue, even though they haven't actually been knocked unconscious.
Right, right.
So in this case, Jones landed a bunch of blows to Miocic's head after that kick to the liver, and the ref decided that Miocic just couldn't defend himself properly anymore.
Ouch. Yeah, I bet that was tough for Miocic, especially since he was trying for a third heavyweight title.
Yeah.
The articles mentioned that he was a firefighter before becoming a UFC fighter.
Yeah, he was. He was a firefighter in Ohio before he went pro, and he's had a phenomenal career. This was his first fight back since March 2021, and right after the fight, he actually announced his retirement.
Oh, that's right. He said, I'm done. I'm hanging him up. I'm retiring, thank God.
Yeah.
Wow. That must have been a really tough decision.
It always is.
But it sounds like he's at peace with it.
It does. It's always kind of bittersweet when a legend retires, but Miocic has definitely earned his place in UFC history. He's fought some of the toughest guys in the division, always giving it his all.
Absolutely. Okay, so we can't talk about this fight without talking about, well, the elephant in the room, President-elect Trump. The article said the crowd went absolutely crazy when he showed up.
It was quite a scene. The energy in the arena was just electric. The crowd, I mean, they just erupted when he arrived.
Yeah.
And then, of course, there were all those USA chants echoing through the arena throughout the night. It was a really politically charged atmosphere.
It's no secret that Trump and UFC President Dana White go way back.
Oh, yeah. Their relationship goes all the way back to the early days of UFC when New Jersey was one of the only states that actually allowed the sport.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and White has openly said that he credits the fights that were held at Trump Taj Mahal for helping UFC gain a foothold, back in the day.
And that relationship's continued, hasn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, White even spoke at the Republican National Convention this year at Trump's request.
He did. It's clear that their connection goes beyond just, business. They seem to have a genuine friendship as well.
So this fight, it was more than just a sporting event. It was a whole spectacle, a social gathering, and with all these heavy political overtones.
Yeah, it's wild to think that you had Trump, Elon Musk, Kennedy Jr. all under the same roof to watch a UFC fight. It's kind of surreal.
It really is. It makes you think about how the lines between sports and politics and celebrity are just like constantly blurring.
I agree. It's a trend we're seeing everywhere now, and it's definitely something to keep an eye on.
Absolutely. Speaking of exciting fights, the co-main event between Charles Oliveira and Michael Chandler was a real nail-biter.
It was. Both fighters were incredibly skilled and just fought their hearts out. Oliveira ended up winning by unanimous decision, though, which really solidified his position as a top contender in the lightweight division.
Yeah, and then there was Bo Nickel. Didn't he win his fight in, what, like 30 seconds?
Something like that.
And then he even got to chat with Trump afterward. This fight card was just full of surprises.
It was a wild night, that's for sure. Every fight had something special going on. But I think what really sent the internet into a frenzy was when Michael Chandler called out Conor McGregor right there in the octagon. He basically said, "We've been wondering where you've been, Conor. Come back and beat me if you can." That was a bold move.
Talk about throwing down the gauntlet. But McGregor has been out of the game for a while now, dealing with those legal issues from 2018, right?
Right, the sexual assault accusations. So it's hard to say if or when he'll be back in fighting shape.
This whole event felt like a pivotal moment for UFC, wouldn't you say?
It did. It felt like we were watching a cultural shift with the UFC moving from like this fringe kind of sport to something much more central, more mainstream even.
And with a figure like Trump right there in the thick of it all, it definitely felt like a turning point.
No doubt about it. This event was a game changer.
So what do you say? We dive into some of those articles now and get into the nitty-gritty of what went down.
Sounds good to me. Let's do it. It really is interesting how figures like Trump have embraced UFC.
Yeah.
You know, you mentioned his long-standing relationship with Dana White,
Right.
but his appearance at this event,
Yeah.
it felt like something more, you know what I mean?
I was just thinking the same thing. It felt very much like he was engaging with the crowd, almost as if he was on the campaign trail.
Exactly. Remember, the election is just days away.
Right.
And this event, I mean, it was like a giant rally, you know, a chance for him to connect with this huge, enthusiastic audience.
Yeah, and let's be real, many of them were probably already Trump supporters.
Probably, yeah.
So it was almost like he was using that raw UFC energy
Yes.
to build momentum for his campaign.
Exactly.
Smart move.
It is a clever strategy, especially when you think about all the media attention his appearance generated.
Oh, totally.
It definitely reached way beyond just the usual UFC fan base. It makes you wonder if we're going to see even more of this kind of crossover between politics and entertainment in the future.
I think you're right.
Yeah.
I mean, we're already seeing athletes become influencers,
Yeah.
politicians showing up on reality TV shows.
It's true.
The lines are definitely blurring.
It's a fascinating trend, and it really makes you think, you know, about authenticity, influence, the nature of celebrity.
Totally.
And speaking of celebrities,
Yeah.
remember that Conor McGregor call-out? What do you think? Does Chandler stand a chance against him?
Oh, it's hard to say. McGregor's been out of the game for a while now, and then there are those legal battles he's got to contend with.
Yeah.
But you can't deny that McGregor still has major star power.
Oh, for sure.
A fight against Chandler, that would be massive.
Oh, no question. It'd be a huge payday for both of them and for the UFC.
Absolutely.
It could be their chance to really capitalize on McGregor's return,
Yeah.
maybe even draw in a whole new audience.
Right. And while we're on the topic of potential matchups, did you see that Jones hinted he might not be retiring after all?
I did, and as a UFC fan, that is exciting news.
Yeah.
He mentioned having options, so that could mean a unification bout against Tom Aspinall, who's the current interim heavyweight champ.
Oh, wow. Can you imagine that showdown?
That would be epic.
And didn't Aspinall win his interim title at Madison Square Garden last November?
He did, yeah. And get this, he was actually at UFC 309.
No way.
Yeah. I read somewhere that he was spotted chatting with NFL quarterback Kyler Murray. It seems like the UFC is already laying the groundwork for a potential Jones-Aspinall fight.
Makes sense.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that would be a blockbuster event.
For sure.
It would keep Jones in the spotlight.
Definitely.
And with Miocic retiring, the heavyweight division definitely needs a new rivalry, you know?
Totally. They need something to capture the fans' imagination.
Exactly.
It would be a clash of styles, for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
Totally. You've got Jones's technical prowess up against Aspinall's raw power.
Man, that's exciting. So to recap, this whole event was a whirlwind, wasn't it?
It was.
Incredible athleticism,
Oh, yeah.
political maneuvering, and maybe even a glimpse into the future of sports entertainment.
I think so.
Upsets, triumphs, and with Miocic retiring, a changing of the guard?
A new era.
Who knows what's next for the UFC?
That's the beauty of it, right? The UFC is unpredictable, it's dynamic, it's always pushing the boundaries,
So true.
and that's what keeps us coming back for more.
Before we move on, there's this one little detail from the articles that I found really interesting. It's about Donald Trump and Joe Rogan.
Oh,
Apparently, they had a pretty warm embrace right before the opening bout, and they even exchanged a few words.
Now that is intriguing. Remember, Trump did that super long interview on
Yeah.
Rogan's podcast?
Right before the election, yeah.
And Rogan has been pretty vocal in his support of Trump.
Yeah, he even endorsed him for president.
He did. And during that podcast interview, Rogan even repeated some of Trump's claims about, voting irregularities and election fraud, even though those claims have been widely disputed.
Yeah, so this whole public display of camaraderie between them at UFC 309, it kind of adds another layer to the whole political narrative, don't you think?
It does. It suggests there's some kind of alignment between them.
Right.
And not just on a personal level, but maybe even on a political level as well.
It makes you think about the influence that figures like Rogan have, especially on their fans.
It's true. It's a good reminder that the lines between entertainment, media, and politics are getting blurrier and blurrier.
For sure. As we navigate this crazy new world, it's more important than ever to be aware of all the forces at play.
Couldn't agree more.
It's like every time we peel back a layer of this UFC 309 onion, we find another juicy detail.
It's been quite the deep dive.
It really has. Okay, so we've talked about Jones, Miocic, Trump, the political stuff, even Conor McGregor lurking in the shadows.
We've covered a lot of ground.
But there's one more thing I want to bring up.
Oh.
Something the articles didn't directly address. But it's been on my mind as we've been talking.
I'm all ears.
It's this whole idea of UFC going mainstream.
Ah, interesting.
With its growing popularity, the connections to powerful people like we've been talking about, the media frenzy. It makes you wonder if UFC is on the verge of, breaking through to a whole new level of acceptance.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, for so long, it's been seen as this kind of niche, almost underground sport, right?
Right.
And it's definitely appealed to a very specific type of fan, but this event at Madison Square Garden, it felt different.
It did. It felt like a real coming out party. Like UFC was announcing its arrival on a much bigger stage.
Exactly. And having people like Trump and Musk and all these other high-profile figures there definitely gave it that, extra layer of legitimacy,
Right.
a sort of cultural acceptance that maybe it didn't have before.
And what do you think the implications of that are? If UFC does become truly mainstream, what happens to the sport itself? Does it change? Does it lose some of its edge?
It's hard to say for sure, but it's definitely a possibility. I mean, as any organization grows, it has to appeal to a wider audience, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes that means changing or maybe even softening some aspects of its core identity.
Do you think we'll see more events like this one, with politicians and celebrities all coming to UFC fights, maybe even using the platform for their own purposes?
I think it's very possible. And it raises some important questions about the whole thing.
Yeah, like what?
Well, about exploitation, for one.
Right.
About the commodification of the sport and this blurring of the lines between what's entertainment and what's more primal, more raw.
But what about the fighters? How do they navigate this new world?
That's a great question. We're already seeing fighters like Jon Jones being more open about their political views, right?
Yeah.
So will that become more common? Will fighters feel pressure to align themselves with certain people or ideas? These are things to consider as this whole thing plays out.
It's a lot to think about. And I don't have all the answers, but it's an important conversation to have as we watch the UFC continue to grow and evolve.
Absolutely. And it's a good reminder that something like a cage fight, which seems so straightforward on the surface, can actually be a reflection of much larger things happening in society, like a microcosm of the world we live in.
That's a really good way to put it. So I think we've covered a lot of ground here today. We talked about Jon Jones's victory, Stipe Miocic's retirement, the whole Trump connection, and even pondered the future of the UFC itself. It's been a fascinating journey.
It has been. And it really feels like this one event, UFC 309, marked a turning point for the sport. It'll be interesting to see where things go from here.
I agree. It's like we got this little glimpse into the future, and it's full of exciting possibilities, but also some potential challenges. So what do you think is the most important thing for our listeners to take away from all of this?
I think the biggest takeaway is just the awareness that the UFC isn't just a sport anymore. It's a cultural force, and it's intertwined with politics, entertainment, and these bigger societal trends that we've been talking about. And as with any powerful force, it's important to be aware of its potential impact and to engage with it in a thoughtful and critical way.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Thanks for joining me for this deep dive. It's been a real eye-opener.
My pleasure. I always enjoy exploring these complex and fascinating